Chapter 9, sections 3 to 4 of J.B. Bury's The Students' Roman Empire, Part 1. The Students' Roman Empire, Part 1, by John Bagnell Bury. Chapter 9, The Winning and Losing of Germany, the Death of Augustus, sections 3 and 4. Section 3, The German Rebellion and Defeat of Varus. The Emperor seems to have entertained few fears of the possibility of a rising in his new German province, for he named as commander of the Rhine armies a man distantly related to himself by marriage, who had no experience of active warfare and was quite incompetent to meet any grave emergency. This was Publius Quinctilius Varus, who, as imperial legatus in Syria, had won wealth, if not fame. It was said that when he came to that province he was poor and Syria was rich, but when he went, he was rich and Syria was poor. His experiences as governor of Syria proved unlucky for him as governor in Germany. He utterly misconceived the situation. He imagined that the policy which he had successfully pursued in Syria might be adopted equally well in Germany. He failed to perceive the differences between the two cases, and to mark the weak grasp with which Rome, as yet, held the lands between the Rhine and the Albis. He seems to have felt himself perfectly safe in the wild places of Germany under the shield of the Roman name. He imposed taxes on the natives and dealt judgment without any fear of consequences. But a storm was brewing under his very eyes. It seemed to those German patriots, who could never brook with patience the rule of a foreign master, that the moment had come when a struggle for the liberty of their nation might be attempted with some chance of success. In this enterprise only 4 prominent German peoples were concerned, the Cherusci, the Chatti, the Marsi, and the Bructeri, the same who had before distinguished themselves by their opposition to Drusus. The Frisians, the Chauci, the Suevic peoples who acknowledged the overlordship of Maroboduus, took no part in this insurrection. The plotter and leader of the rebellion was the Cheruscan prince Arminius, son of Sigimer, then in the 26th year of his age. He and his father Flavius had received the privilege of Roman citizenship from Augustus. He had been raised to the equestrian rank, and had seen military service under the Roman standard. He was not only physically brave, but it was thought that he possessed intellectual qualities unequal in a barbarian. The Romans naturally trusted his loyalty, and the insinuations of Segestes his countryman, who knew him better, received no attention. Sigimer, the brother, and Segimund, the son of this Segestes, threw themselves into the enterprise of Arminius, and Thusnelda, the daughter of Segestes, married the young patriot against the wishes of her father. It was the policy of the contrivers of the insurrection to keep the design dark until the last moment, and in the meantime to lull Varus, already secure, into a security still more complete. Of the 5 Germanic legions, 2 had their winter quarters at Moguntiacum, the other 3 at Castra Vetera on the lower Rhine, or at the fortress of Aliso on the Luppia. In summer they used sometimes to visit the interior parts of the province, and in 9 A.D., Varus, with 3 legions, occupied summer quarters on the Visurgis, probably not far from the modern town of Minden and the Porta Westphalica. The camp was full of advocates and clients, and the chief conspirators were present, on intimate terms with the governor and constantly dining with him. Autumn came, and as the rainy season approached, Varus prepared to retrace his steps westward. There can be no doubt that a line of communication connected his summer station with Aliso, and, if the army had returned as it came, Arminius could hardly have been successful in his plans. But a message suddenly arrived that a distant tribe had revolted, and Varus decided to take a roundabout way homewards in order to suppress it. This news was suspiciously opportune for the rebels. The Romans had to make their way through a hilly district of pathless forests, and their difficulties were increased not only by the encumbrances of heavy baggage and camp followers, but by the heavy rains, which had already begun and made the ground slippery. The moment had come for the German patriots to strike a desperate blow for independence. Segestes warned Varus of the impending danger, but the infatuated governor trusted the asseverations of Arminius. As the legions were making their laborious way through the Saltus Teutoburgiensis, they were assailed by the confederate insurgents. This Teutoburg forest cannot be identified with any certainty, but it seems to have been somewhere between the Amisia and the Lupia, northeast of Aliso. It is impossible to determine how far the circumstances of the case and how far the incompetence of the general were to blame for the disaster which followed. For 3 days the Romans continued to advance, resisting as well as they could the attacks of the foe, and if Varus had possessed the confidence of his soldiers and known how to hold them together, it seems probable that he might have passed through the danger in safety. But both officers and soldiers were demoralized under his command. The prefect of the horse deserted his post, taking all the cavalry with him, and leaving the foot soldiers to their fate. Varus was the first to despair. He had received a wound, and he slew himself. Others followed his example, and the rest surrendered. The prisoners were slain, some buried alive, some crucified, some sacrificed on the altars. The forces of Varus consisted of 3 legions, 17th, 18th, 19th, 6 cohorts, and 3 squadrons of cavalry. The army had been weakened by the loss of detachments, which, at the request of the conspirators, had been sent to the territories of various tribes to preserve order. These detachments, taken chiefly from the auxiliary cohorts, were slaughtered when the insurrection broke out. Of the troops which were entrapped in the Teutoburg forest, numbering probably almost 20,000 men, only the cavalry escaped and a few individual foot soldiers. The 3 eagles of the 3 legions fell into the hands of the victors. Such a disaster had not befallen since the day of Carrhae. The peoples of central Germany from the Rhine to the Visurgis had thus thrown off the Roman yoke. The cause of freedom had been victorious. 2 results, fraught with great danger to the Roman Empire, seemed likely to follow. It was to be feared that the triumphant Germans would push across to the left bank of the Rhine, arouse a revolt there, and perhaps shake the fidelity of Gaul. And seemingly it was to be feared that Maroboduus, lord of the Marcomanni, and chief of the Suevic confederacy, would declare himself on the side of the insurgents, now they were successful. But neither of these dangers were realized. The first was foiled by the bravery of Lucius Caedicius, commander of the garrison in Aliso, and the promptness of Lucius Nonius Asprenas, who commanded the 2 legions stationed at Moguntiacum. The first movement of the rebels after their victory was to attack Aliso, but Caedicius defended it so bravely that they were obliged to blockade it. When provisions ran short and no relief came, the garrison stole out on a dark night, and made their way, harassed by the attacks of the enemy, to Castra Vetera. Thither Asprenas, when the news of the disaster reached him, had hastened with his 2 legions, to hinder the Germans from crossing the Rhine. The other danger was frustrated by the peculiar temper of Maroboduus himself. Arminius had triumphantly sent him the head of Varus as a token of his own amazing success, hoping to persuade him to join the confederacy against Rome. But the message was ineffectual. Maroboduus refused to link himself with the insurgents or to depart from his policy of neutrality. When the news of the defeat reached Rome, Augustus met the emergency with spirit and energy. The citizens seemed indifferent to the crisis. Many of them refused to place their names on the military roll, and the Emperor was obliged to resort to fines and threats of severer punishment. Troops hastily levied from the veterans and freedmen were sent with all speed to the Rhine, and the Germans, who served as an imperial bodyguard, were disarmed and driven forth from Rome. In the following year, 10 A.D., Tiberius assumed the command of the Rhine army, which was increased to 8 legions. 4 of these were doubtless stationed at Moguntiacum and 4 at Vetera, and it was probably the Emperor's intention that when the immediate crisis was past, the command of the Germanic armies should be divided between 2 generals. During the first year Tiberius seems to have been engaged in organizing the defence of the Rhine, restoring the confidence of the old legions, and establishing discipline among the new. In the next year, 11 A.D., he crossed the river, and spent the summer in Germany, but he does not seem to have ventured far into the country, or to have attempted any hostile enterprise. He was accompanied by his nephew Germanicus, to whom proconsular powers had been granted. In the following year the duties of his consulship retained Germanicus at Rome, but in 13 A.D. he succeeded Tiberius in the sole command on the Rhine. During these years nothing was done against the Germans, though the state of war still continued. But Germanicus was not long content with inactivity. Upon him seemed to devolve the duty of restoring his father's work, which had been so disastrously demolished, and he burned to do it. But his efforts to recover the lost dominion and reach the Albis once more must form the subject of another chapter. SECT. IV. — THE DEATH OF AUGUSTUS. The slaughter of the Varian legions in the wilds of Germany tarnished the lustre of Roman arms, and cast a certain gloom over the last days of the Augustan age. The Emperor himself, now stricken in years, felt the blow painfully. He let his hair and beard grow long. It is said that he dashed his head against the walls of his chamber, crying, "Varus, Varus, give me back my legions." Every year he went into mourning on the anniversary of the defeat. He knew that his end must soon come, and he began to set his house in order. In 12 A.D. he addressed a letter to the senate, in which he commended Germanicus to its protection, and commended the senate itself to the vigilance of Tiberius. In the following year he assumed once more the proconsular power for a period of 10 years. At the same time, as has been recorded in Chapter 4, Tiberius was raised to a position almost equal to that of the Emperor himself, and his son Drusus received a privilege of standing for the consulship in 3 years, without the preliminary step of the praetorship. A census was held in 14 A.D., and after its completion Tiberius set out for Illyricum, where he was to resume the supreme command. Augustus accompanied him as far as Beneventum, but in returning to the Campanian coast was attacked by dysentery and died at Nola, August 19. Tiberius had been sent for without delay, and came, perhaps in time to hear the parting words of his stepfather. There is no good reason to believe the insinuation that the Emperor's death was caused or hastened by poison administered by Livia. Her son's accession was sure, and Augustus was old and weak, so that it would hardly have been worth while to commit this crime. Both contemporaries and posterity had good cause to regard Augustus as a benefactor. He had given them the gift of peace. They also esteemed him fortunate (felix), and his good fortune became almost proverbial. Yet it has been truly remarked that luck was the one thing that failed him. Both points of view are true. He was unusually fortunate. When he entered upon his career as a competitor for power, his motives were probably as vulgar as those of his rivals. There is no reason to suppose that in the pursuit of ambition he had large views of political reform or an exalted ideal of statesmanship. His actions throughout the Civil War indicate the shrewd, cool, and collected mind. They give no token of wide views, no promise of the future greatness. "But his intellect expanded with his fortunes, and his soul grew with his intellect." When he came to be supreme ruler, he rose to the position. He learned to take a large view of the functions of the lord of the Roman world; and there was born in him a spirit of enthusiasm for the work which history set him to accomplish. He knew too how to bear his fortune with dignity. But he was unlucky when his fortune was most firmly established. It was not given to the founder of the Empire to leave a successor of his own blood, and, as we have seen, his endeavours to settle the succession were doomed to one bitter disappointment after another, and led to domestic unhappiness. And it was not given to him to establish a secure frontier for the northern provinces of the Empire. The efforts in that direction, which were made under his auspices and seemed on the eve of being crowned with success, were undone by a stroke of bad luck. Yet, reviewing his whole career as a statesman and reflecting on all that he achieved, we may assuredly say that the divine Augustus was fortunate with a measure of good fortune that is rarely bestowed on men who live out their life. The written memorial of his own acts, which Augustus composed before his death, may be spoken of here. It has been incompletely preserved in a Latin inscription, which covers the walls of the pronaos of a temple of Augustus at Ancyra. Owing to this accident it is generally known as the Monumentum Ancyranum, but its proper title was Res Gestae Dini Augusti. Fragments of the Greek text of the same work have also been found in Pisidia, and have helped scholars in restoring the sense, where the Latin fails. In this document the Emperor briefly describes his acts from his 19th to his 77th year, with remarkable dignity, reserve, and moderation. The great historical value of this memorial, composed by the founder of the Empire himself, need hardly be pointed out. An extract will give an idea of the way in which the great statesman wrote the brief chronicle of the history which he made. "I extended the frontiers," he says, "of all those provinces of the Roman people, on whose borders there were nations not subject to our empire. I pacified the provinces of the Gauls, and the Spains, and Germany, from Gades to the mouth of the Albis. I reduced to a state of peace the Alps, from the district which is nearest the Adriatic Sea to the Tuscan Sea, without wrongful aggressions on any nation. My fleet navigated the ocean from the mouth of the Rhine eastward, as far as the borders of the Cimbri, whither no Roman before ever passed either by land or sea; and the Cimbri, the Charydes, and the Simones, and other German peoples of the same region, sought the friendship of me and the Roman people. By my command and under my auspices, 2 armies were sent, almost at the same time, to Ethiopia and to Arabia, called Eudaemon Felix, and very large forces of the enemies in both countries were cut to pieces in battle, and many towns taken. The invaders of Ethiopia advanced as far as the town of Nabata, very near Meroe. The army which invaded Arabia marched into the territory of the Sabbae, as far as the town of Mariba." Another work compiled by Augustus was the Breviarium Imperii, containing a short statement of all the resources of the Roman state, and including the number of the population of citizens, subjects, and allies. It was in fact a handbook to the statistics of the Roman Empire. At the end of this work he recorded his solemn advice to succeeding sovereigns, not to attempt to extend the boundaries of the Empire. CHAPTER X.